The worst part wasn't the wine soaking through her dress. It was the silence that followed. The way every head in the great hall turned, and not a single person moved to help her. Lucy stood perfectly still in the middle of Lord Harwick's banquet hall, the shattered clay goblet at her feet, dark red wine bleeding into the stone floor like a wound that refused to close. Her linen dress, the pale gray one she had mended twice that season, the one she wore on nights when the Lord received important guests, clung cold and heavy to her side. The tray she had been carrying was somewhere behind her. She hadn't heard it fall. She had only heard the impact of Beta Roland's boot, connecting with her hip, sharp and deliberate, as she passed his chair. Not an accident. He hadn't even looked at her when he did it. "Clumsy girl," he said, reaching for a fresh goblet without breaking his conversation with the man beside him. Lucy did not move. She did not apologize. She breathed, slowly, through her nose, and counted the weight of every gaze in that room pressing against her skin like stones. She was 23 years old. She had been serving in this hall for 11 months, ever since her father's land had been absorbed into Lord Harwick's territory following the border wars. She knew every crack in these flagstone floors. She knew which candles burned fastest and which tables needed their legs shimmed with folded cloth. She had never once broken a goblet, not before tonight. The tray had slipped when his boot hit her. That was all. Around her, the conversation slowly resumed. Laughter returned. A lute player in the corner began a soft melody, and the smell of roasted pheasant and burnt rosemary drifted back into the foreground. The moment dissolved the way spilled wine did, quickly, without ceremony. No one helped her. She bent and collected the broken pieces herself, her jaw set, her golden braid falling over one shoulder as she crouched. One shard sliced the pad of her thumb, and she felt the sting of it with distant recognition, the way a person does when they are already holding too much pain in other places to mind a small one. She pressed her thumb against the fabric of her apron and straightened. Beta Roland was speaking loudly now, his square jaw tilted toward the man beside him, a lord from the northern marches, judging by the gray wolf sigil embroidered on his cloak. Roland himself wore the deep blue of the Ashen Pack, 3 silver threads at his collar marking his rank. He was broad-shouldered and loud, the kind of man who filled a room with his presence and mistook the discomfort of others for respect. She had disliked him since the moment he arrived, 3 days ago, as part of the advance party for the Alpha King's progress through the southern territories. The Alpha King himself had not yet arrived. His entourage had come first. Advisors, guards, the Beta, the logistics of a royal visit spreading through the village like an early frost. Lucy had been assigned to the head table for the duration of the visit. An honor, according to the head steward. She had said nothing. She carried the broken pieces to the kitchen corridor and deposited them in the clay wastepot near the door. Marin, the head cook's young assistant, looked at her with wide eyes from across the kitchen hearth.
"Did he?" "It's nothing," Lucy said. "Your dress? I'll soak it tonight." She poured cold water over her cut thumb at the basin and wrapped it in a thin strip of linen. Her hands were steady. They had always been steady, a quality she had learned to be careful about, because steadiness in a woman without rank or wolf was the kind of thing that made certain men uneasy. She had no wolf. That was the fact of her life that colored everything else. Born to a noble family of low-ranking shifters, she had reached her 21st year without shifting, without the inner presence that every other wolf-blooded person described as a voice, a shadow, a warmth behind the ribs. The healers had called her deficient. The pack hierarchy had reassigned her family's lands on that basis. A holder with no wolf could not defend a border territory. Her father had died not long after, something quiet and grief-shaped that the healer had called heart failure, and that Lucy had privately called something else entirely. She had come to Harwick's service because there was nowhere else to go. Her younger brother Emmerich had been taken in by the Lord's household at her insistence. A page's position, safe enough, far enough from the kitchens that she didn't have to watch him scrub floors alongside her. He was 16.
He still believed things could improve. Lucy had stopped believing that, but she had not stopped watching. She retied her apron and returned to the hall. The evening wore on. She moved between tables with careful economy, refilling goblets and clearing trenchers, her back straight and her expression neutral. Beta Roland called for more wine twice more, and she served him both times without looking at his face. He did not acknowledge her existence. That was the normal shape of things. It was near the end of the third course that she overheard it. She had bent to retrieve a dropped linen cloth beside the high table, close to the wall, behind the tall carved chairbacks, invisible in the way that serving women became invisible when lords forgot to keep their voices low. "Not staying past the new moon," Roland was saying. "The king moves on to Greyvale by then." "And the girl?" The other voice, the northern lord, Lord Fenwick, low, conspiratorial. "The one from the Varden line?" A pause, the sound of wine being swallowed. "She's still here," Roland said. "Serving, of all things. Didn't shift, so they stripped the land. She doesn't know what she is." "Does she know about the treaty clause?" "No. And if she finds out?" Another pause, longer this time. Lucy did not breathe. "She won't," Roland said simply. "She'll be gone before she does." The word gone hung in the cold air between the carved chairbacks, like smoke from a poorly drawn chimney. It did not mean dismissed. It did not mean reassigned. She had been raised in a household where men used clean words for ugly things, and she understood the language of careful omission. "She'll be gone." Her thumb throbbed beneath its linen wrapping. She straightened slowly, the cloth in her hand, and walked back toward the kitchen as if she had heard nothing. Her steps were even. Her breathing was measured. But something had shifted inside her. A tectonic thing, slow and enormous. The kind of shift that doesn't announce itself as it happens. Her mind had always been her sharpest tool. She had spent 11 months making herself invisible, and her mind had continued quietly to work. The Varden line? Her mother's family name. Her name. The one she hadn't used in almost a year. Treaty clause. She didn't know what that meant yet, but she knew, with the bone-certain clarity of someone who had been surviving on information scraps for the better part of a year, that she needed to find out before the new moon. That gave her 6 days. She stacked 3 clean trenchers and returned to the hall for the final course, her expression composed, her golden braid catching the torchlight as she passed beneath the iron chandelier. Beta Roland didn't look at her. Lord Fenwick was refilling his goblet himself. Neither of them watched a serving woman cross the room with quiet purpose. Neither of them noticed that her hands, resting against the wooden trenchers, were entirely, perfectly still. The castle's record room was kept locked after Compline. Lucy knew this because she had spent 3 weeks last autumn delivering evening candles to the steward's corridor, and she had noted, the way she noted everything, that the iron key hung on a hook inside the steward's own chamber door, visible for exactly the 4 seconds it took him to open it each morning. She had also noted that the steward, a heavy-set man named Aldrich who smelled permanently of tallow and sour ale, drank 2 full cups of spiced mead every night before retiring, and that by the time the hall bells rang the final hour, he slept with the solidity of a man at peace with his choices. She was not at peace with hers, but she moved anyway. The corridor was dark, lit only by the guttering remnant of a wall torch near the stairwell. Lucy wore her darkest cloak, a deep charcoal wool she had bought second-hand from a departing kitchen maid, and she moved in the way her father had taught her years ago, before the world had rearranged itself into something unrecognizable. Her father had been a second son of a minor noble line, a man who loved maps and old texts more than politics, and who had believed firmly that knowledge was the only inheritance that couldn't be seized. Learn to move quietly, Lucy. Not because you're afraid, because there is power in being underestimated. She had learned. She had learned other things from him, too. Things she had not used in almost 2 years. Things she kept folded away in the back of her mind like a blade wrapped in cloth. Useful, dangerous, patient. The record room door opened with a low groan she muffled with the edge of her cloak pressed against the iron hinge. Inside, the smell was familiar. Old parchment, dried ink, the faint mustiness of rolled documents stored too close together. A single narrow window let in pale moonlight, enough to navigate by. She did not touch the central shelves. She went directly to the territorial registry, a fat, leather-bound volume near the back wall, stamped with Lord Harwick's seal, and opened it across the reading table. Her fingers moved fast and sure. She had learned to read before most children in her village learned to ride, another gift from her father, who had considered illiteracy a form of intentional poverty. She found the Varden entry within minutes. House Varden, border territory, southeastern corridor, absorbed under the emergency land provisions following the Greyvale Compact, 3rd year of King Cassian's reign. Single surviving heir, Lucienne Varden, female, unshifted. Status, ward null. Land held in provisional trust pending the expiration of the Covenant Clause. She stopped. Covenant Clause. She turned backward through the pages to the index and found it listed under Royal Treaties, a subsection she would never have thought to search without the name. Covenant Clause, Article 9, Greyvale Compact. In the event that a territorial heir of the Varden bloodline is confirmed alive and unmarked by another Alpha before the 5th year of the current king's reign, said heir retains the right to petition the Alpha King directly for land restoration and recognition of status. Her breath left her in a slow, controlled exhale. The 5th year of King Cassian's reign. This was the 4th year. She had 1 year left to claim what was hers. 1 year. And Roland knew about it. Roland, who had said she'll be gone with the quiet certainty of a man who had already made arrangements. She read the entry again, twice more, until the words were pressed into her memory like a seal into hot wax. Then she closed the registry, returned it to its exact position, and left the room as quietly as she had entered, drawing the door shut behind her with both hands to ease the latch back into place without sound. She was halfway back to the servants' corridor when she heard the footsteps. 2 sets. Heavy, deliberate, the sound of boots with iron heel caps on stone. She pressed herself into the alcove beside a tapestry depicting a hunt scene, gray wolves in a winter forest, and went absolutely still. The footsteps belonged to 2 of Roland's guards, she realized, as they passed close enough for her to smell the leather of their armor. They were not patrolling. They were moving with direction. Toward the servants' wing, toward the row of small rooms where the household servants slept, where Emmerich slept. The cold that moved through her was not the cold of the stone corridor. It was older than that. It was the cold of someone who has correctly predicted a terrible thing and hoped they were wrong. She did not run. Running made noise. She moved fast and soundless, cutting through the back passage that connected the tapestry corridor to the servants' stair, a shortcut she had discovered in her 2nd week at Harwick's castle, because she had made it her business to know every route in and out of every room. She reached the servants' wing 30 seconds before the guards turned the corner into the main approach. Emmerich's door was the 3rd on the left. She opened it without knocking, slipped inside, and closed it behind her in one fluid motion. Her brother was asleep, curled on his narrow pallet, one arm thrown over his face. He was 16, and looked younger in sleep, all the careful composure he had been practicing gone. Just a boy with her same golden hair and their father's long hands. Emmerich. She said it quietly, but with force, the way their father had always said her name when urgency was required, but panic was not permitted. He woke immediately. He had always been a light sleeper. Lucy. His voice was rough. Then he read her face, and his own sharpened. What? Get your boots, she said, quietly. Now. He didn't ask questions. That was the thing about Emmerich that she loved most. He trusted her the way he had trusted their father, with a completeness that was both gift and weight. She crossed to his small window while he dressed. The servants' wing faced the inner courtyard. 2 stories down, stone. No good. But the courtyard connected to the stable yard, and the stable yard had a gate in the east wall that the night groomsman left unlatched when he slipped out to visit the laundress in the village. She had noted this. She had noted it, and thought useful, and filed it away like everything else. "We're leaving?" Emmerich said quietly behind her. "We're leaving," she confirmed. "Tonight. Right now." He picked up a small leather satchel from under his pallet. She noticed he had packed it with practical speed, suggesting some part of him had been expecting this possibility, and slung it over one shoulder. Then he looked at her with their father's steady gray eyes. "You found something." "I found several things," she said. "I'll explain when we're clear of the walls." She opened his door a crack. The corridor was empty. The guards had not yet reached this end of the wing, or they had stopped at another room. She could not know which, and she could not afford to wait and find out. They moved together through the back passage, down the servants' stair, through the cold of the lower courtyard and across the shadow-dark stable yard with the night air biting at their faces. The gate in the east wall was, as noted, unlatched. It swung open under her hand. Beyond it was the edge of the village, and beyond the village was the thornwood. 3 leagues of dense forest that marked the boundary between Harwick's territory and the open roads of the kingdom's eastern corridor. She didn't stop moving until the castle walls were behind them and the trees had closed overhead. Only then did she let herself breathe. Emmerich stopped beside her, his breath clouding in the cold air, and looked back at the distant torchlight of the castle walls. "Lucy," he said carefully, "what exactly did you find in there?" She pulled her cloak tighter. Above them, through gaps in the canopy, the moon hung low and almost full, spilling silver through the branches. Her thumb still throbbed. Her mind was moving fast, sorting through everything she knew, the treaty, the clause, the timeline. Roland's words said in the comfortable certainty of a man who had not looked at the serving woman close enough to see her listening. "I found out that our family name still has legal claim to our father's lands," she said, "and that someone powerful wants to make sure I never use it." Emmerich was quiet for a moment. "So what do we do?" She looked through the trees toward the eastern road. King Cassian's progress was moving south. He would be in Harwick's territory within 2 days, and before the new moon, before Roland could execute whatever he had planned so calmly over roasted pheasant and expensive wine, she needed to reach the Alpha King, directly, herself, without Roland between them. "She'll be gone," he had said. She pulled her braid over one shoulder and tied it back under her hood. "We find the king," she said. They made it 3 leagues into the thornwood before Lucy heard the wolves. Not close, not yet. But in the forest at night, sound carried differently than in open land. It bent around tree trunks and pooled in low ground, arriving from unexpected directions, intimate and sourceless at once. She had grown up near a forest, and she knew the difference between wolves hunting prey and wolves hunting something with intent. These were the latter. The pattern was too deliberate, too measured, covering ground in a sweep rather than a chase. Roland hadn't waited for morning. "They're running a grid," she said quietly. Emmerich looked at her sideways. "How do you know that?" "Because I would." She changed their direction without breaking stride, angling northeast instead of east, toward the ridge where the ground rose rocky and uneven. Shifted wolves moved faster on flat ground. The ridge would cost them speed, but gain them something more valuable: the high approach to the King's Road, which cut through the northern edge of the thornwood, and was, according to every traveler who had passed through Harwick's village in the last week, the route the Royal Progress was taking south. Emmerich kept pace without complaint. He was 16 and lean, and had their father's endurance, the kind built from years of early mornings and physical work rather than training. Lucy had both, the endurance and the training. She had simply kept the training invisible. Her father had hired a retired royal guard to teach her when she was 12. Not because he expected her to fight. He had said, with careful honesty, that he hoped she would never need to. But because he had understood something about the world that most fathers in their position preferred not to examine too closely, that a woman without a wolf in a shifter kingdom was only as safe as the goodwill of the people around her, and goodwill was not a reliable foundation. She had trained for 7 years. Blades, primarily. A short blade for close quarters, a longer one for distance management. Hand combat, pressure points. The kind of fighting that was not about strength, but about geometry, leverage, and the willingness to act before hesitation could hollow you out. She had not trained in almost 2 years, but the body held what it had been given. The howl came from the south, closer now, and then another to the southeast, the second wolf adjusting, responding to the first. They were communicating, professional. She touched Emmerich's arm and they stopped moving. In the silence, she heard something else. Hoofbeats on stone. Multiple horses, heavy-gaited, the sound of a large party moving at a disciplined pace on a paved road. Close, perhaps a quarter league north through the tree line. The King's Road. Go, she said. They ran. The tree line broke onto the road with abrupt suddenness, moonlight flooding down after the closed dark of the forest. Lucy stepped onto the paved stone and looked both ways in the same breath. And stopped. The Royal Progress was not a quarter league away. It was here. Torches. A column of mounted riders, 12 at least, with a banner she recognized from the territorial seals on Harwick's official correspondence. The black wolf on silver of House Vale, King Cassian's line. Supply wagons behind, outriders flanking, and at the center of the column, unhurried and still as a man who had never needed to prove he was the most dangerous thing in any given space, a rider on a dark horse. She had no time to consider the approach. The wolves behind them broke from the tree line 30 seconds later, 2 large gray-brown shapes that pulled up short at the edge of the road when they registered the mounted column, their advance halting with the frustrated precision of men who had been outmaneuvered and knew it. Every guard in the column had a blade half drawn. The outriders moved to flank positions. The forest edge became very still. Stand down. The voice from the center of the column was not loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of voice that had given orders in loud places for long enough that it had learned to cut through noise by quality rather than volume. The guards held. The 2 wolves at the tree line did not advance. They stood at the forest's edge with the uncertain stillness of men who had been given an order they hadn't anticipated and were calculating whether to ignore it. Lucy stepped forward into the torchlight, not because she was unafraid, she was, but because standing still was a form of waiting, and she had been waiting for 11 months, and she was finished. I need to speak with the Alpha King, she said clearly. One of the outriders moved his horse between her and the column. Step back from the road. I won't. She kept her voice level. My name is Lucienne Varden. I am the last surviving heir of the Varden border territory. I have legal standing under Article 9 of the Greyvale Compact to petition the Alpha King directly, and I am invoking that right now, tonight, before your beta completes whatever arrangement he has made to ensure I cannot do so tomorrow. Silence. Then the rider at the center of the column moved his horse forward, past the outrider, past the first rank of guards, until he was close enough that the torchlight reached him properly. She had seen illustrations of King Cassian in Harwick's hall, woodblock seals, a portrait in the receiving room that was clearly flattering in specific ways while being accurate in others. She had formed a general impression. Large, dark-haired, powerful. The reality was more specific than that. He was very tall in the saddle, broad through the shoulders, wearing a dark leather breastplate over a gray tunic with no ornamentation beyond the functional. Crossed harness straps, a heavy cloak the color of charcoal wool, leather bracers that looked used rather than ceremonial. His hair was black, worn in tight braids pulled back from his face, and his eyes in the torchlight were a pale, striking blue that caught light like metal. A thin scar ran along the left side of his jaw. He did not look like a king performing kingship. He looked like a man who had been made for something difficult and had simply never stopped doing it. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Then he looked past her at the two wolves still standing at the tree line. Roland's men, still shifted, still watching. Something moved across his expression. Not surprise. Something colder than surprise, and more controlled. "Whose wolves are those?" he said. "Beta Roland's, my lord," one of the guards answered. The king's pale eyes returned to Lucy. They moved, briefly, efficiently, over her face, her stance, the linen wrapped around her thumb, the dark stain still faint on the side of her gray dress that the cloak didn't fully cover. "You're injured," he said. "It's minor." I didn't ask if it was minor. She met his gaze and did not look away. Because looking away was something you did when you had something to hide, or when you believed the other person had authority over your emotions, and she was not prepared to grant him either. "A cut," she said, "from a broken goblet. It happened in Lord Harwick's hall this evening." "How did the goblet break?" The question was quiet. It landed with a weight that suggested he had already begun assembling a picture and was waiting to see if her answer would confirm it. "Beta Roland's boot connected with my hip as I passed his chair," she said. The tray slipped. The king said nothing for a moment. The column behind him was completely still, horses included, which she noticed with the part of her mind that catalogued things automatically. "Emmerich," she said without turning. "Come out of the tree line." Her brother stepped into the torchlight beside her, his satchel over one shoulder, his jaw set in a passable imitation of her own expression. He was 16, and trying to look older, and she loved him so completely in that moment that it was almost painful. The king looked at the boy, then back at her. "You came to the road at night, through a wolf pursuit, with a legal citation and a younger brother," he said. There was something in his voice that was not quite dry humor, and not quite admiration. Something in between that she didn't have a name for yet. "Yes," she said simply. He was quiet for another moment. Then he dismounted. Not quickly. There was no urgency in his movements, only a settled deliberateness that made even the simple act of swinging down from a horse look like a decision made from authority rather than habit. He was taller standing than he had appeared mounted, which was not often true of men. He walked toward her and stopped 2 arms' lengths away, close enough to speak without the column hearing. "Article 9 requires a formal hearing," he said quietly. "Not a roadside claim in the middle of the night." "I know." "Then you know I cannot restore your lands on the basis of a single conversation." "I'm not asking you to," she said. "I'm asking you not to let your beta have me killed before I can request one." Another silence. His pale blue eyes held hers with an attention that was not intrusive, but was, undeniably, uncomfortably, complete. The kind of attention that did not skim over things. "You believe he intends to kill you," he said. "I believe he said I would be gone before the new moon, and I believe he sent 2 of his wolves into the thornwood 2 hours after I overheard him say it." She watched something shift behind his expression, subtle, controlled, a tightening at the jaw that was gone almost before it formed. He turned back toward his column. "Roven!" he called. One of the senior guards moved forward. "Escort Beta Roland's men back to Harwick's castle and inform Lord Harwick that his guests will be departing at first light." A pause. "Send Roland to me." "Yes, my lord." He turned back to Lucy. The torchlight between them was steady. No wind reached the road here, sheltered as it was by the trees on both sides. "You and your brother will travel with the progress tonight," he said. It was not a question. "I don't require your charity," she said, and then stopped, because that wasn't accurate, and she knew it. She required exactly that, for exactly tonight, and pride was a luxury she could not afford until she was alive long enough to use it. "You require protection," he said, without inflection. "That isn't charity. That's a king's obligation to a subject invoking a legal right." He looked at her with that same focused attention. "Do you accept?" She looked at him, at this man who had dismounted in the middle of a night road to speak to a serving woman at eye level. and felt something she didn't entirely trust. The faint, dangerous pull of relief. "Yes," she said. They gave her a tent. Not a servant's corner in a supply wagon, not a blanket near the horses. An actual tent, small but solid, with a canvas floor and a folded wool blanket and a copper basin of water that was still faintly warm when she arrived at it. Emmerich was placed in the adjacent tent, close enough that she could hear him shift on his pallet through the thin canvas wall. She did not sleep. She sat on the edge of the low camp bed and unwrapped her thumb, and rewrapped it with the clean strip of linen a guard had brought her without being asked, and she thought about Roland. About the way he had said she'll be gone. Not with anger, not with relish, but with the flat practical tone of a man discussing the disposal of something inconvenient. That tone was more frightening than anger would have been. Anger was personal. That tone was administrative. She thought about the covenant clause. The 5th year. 1 year remaining. She had not known. Had not been permitted to know. She understood now. And the not knowing had almost been enough. 11 months of serving wine and mending dresses and being invisible, while her birthright sat in a record room 2 corridors from where she slept. Her father would have found a particular kind of bitter irony in that. She lay back on the bed without undressing, her cloak still around her shoulders, and stared at the canvas ceiling while the camp settled into the rhythms of a night halt. Guards rotating, horses shifting, the low murmur of men talking near the fire line. At some point, without deciding to, she slept. She woke to gray pre-dawn light, and the smell of wood smoke and boiling grain, and the sound of someone outside her tent with a measured, deliberate tread. "Lady Varden." The voice was the king's. Not the full weight of it, just the edge. The way it sounded when he was not projecting command but simply speaking. She sat up and ran her hands over her hair, tightening the braid that had half unraveled in the night. "Yes. There is something you should see before we break camp." She laced her boots, straightened her cloak, and stepped outside. The morning was cold and white, ground fog sitting low between the trees, the camp emerging from it in pieces. Tents, horses, the orange glow of the cook fires. King Cassian stood a few feet from her tent entrance, dressed already in his traveling clothes, cloak clasped at the shoulder, his dark braids clean and neat. He looked like a man who did not have a disheveled version of himself. Beside him stood Beta Roland. Lucy went still. Roland looked different in the morning light than he had across a banquet table. Less comfortable. There was a rigidity to his jaw that had not been there the night before, and his eyes moved to her with something she recognized as recalculation. The expression of a man revising his plans in real time. "Beta Roland has offered an account of last evening," the king said. His voice was neutral in a way that was more pointed than anger. "I would like you to hear it." Roland straightened. "There was a misunderstanding," he said. "My foot caught the serving girl's tray. An accident. As for the conversation the girl claims to have overheard, her name is Lucienne Varden," the king said. A beat of silence. "As for the conversation Lady Varden claims to have overheard," Roland continued, the correction sitting visibly uncomfortable in his mouth. "She has misinterpreted a private discussion. I was speaking of a different matter entirely. There was no threat made. I have no knowledge of her legal status, and no interest in her lands." Lucy looked at him steadily. She had expected this. A man who planned things administratively also denied things administratively. Clean, smooth, difficult to disprove. "You used my family name," she said. "In that conversation. You said the girl from the Varden line. You said she doesn't know what she is. And then you said she would be gone before the new moon." She paused. "Those were your exact words, in that order." Roland's jaw tightened. "You misheard. I was 3 feet behind your chair," she said. "I don't mishear at 3 feet. You're a serving woman. Your word against a beta's carries the same legal weight under Article 9, the king said quietly. "When the subject in question is invoking territorial rights, He looked at Roland with the expression of a man who had already reached a conclusion and was waiting for the other person to catch up. Which she is. Roland went silent. The king turned to Lucy. Do you have anything further to add before I make a determination on Beta Roland's position within this progress? She thought about it honestly, about what could be proven and what could not, about the difference between the truth she knew and the evidence that existed. The record room entry was provable. Her presence in it was not something she could easily explain. The overheard conversation had no witness but herself. What she had was her word, her name, and the undeniable fact that Roland's wolves had entered the Thornwood 2 hours after that conversation and had been running a search grid rather than a patrol route. The wolves in the forest last night, she said. What was their stated purpose? The king looked at one of his senior guards, a gray-haired man with a captain's braid at his collar. The guard cleared his throat. Beta Roland's men reported that they were tracking a runaway servant who had stolen from Lord Harwick's stores, the guard said. Lucy looked at Roland. What did I steal? Roland said nothing. If your men were tracking a thief, she continued, her voice even, there would be a record of what was stolen, when it was discovered missing, and by whom the order to pursue was given. And that record would have existed before I entered the forest, not after. Silence. The king was watching her with that focused, unreadable attention she was beginning to recognize as his default mode. He was not watching Roland. He was watching her. The way she stood. The way she constructed the argument. The way she did not raise her voice. Roland, the king said. My lord, you will return to the capital. Not Harwick's castle. The capital. You will remain there until I return, at which point there will be a formal inquiry into last evening's events. A pause. You will surrender your travel seal to Captain Aldrin before you leave this camp. Roland's face went through several things in rapid succession. Disbelief, anger, the precise moment he calculated whether to object, and the moment he decided not to. Yes, my lord, he said. He walked away without looking at Lucy. She watched him go and felt no particular triumph, only a cold, tired recognition that this was not finished. Men like Roland did not disappear because they were inconvenienced. They regrouped. The king waited until Roland was out of earshot. You argued that well, he said. I argued it accurately, she said. There's a difference. Something shifted in his expression. The faint edge of something she might have called amusement in another context. It disappeared quickly. The formal hearing for your petition will take place at Grey Vale in 4 days, he said. You will travel with the progress until then. Your brother as well. He paused. I'll have one of the women from my household staff assigned to assist you. Clean clothing, meals. You won't serve at table. She looked at him. I'm not fragile. I know, he said. That's not why. She didn't entirely understand what he meant by that. She let it sit, rather than asking, because she had learned that questions asked too quickly sometimes got answers that were premature. Thank you, she said instead. It came out with more difficulty than she expected. Not from pride, exactly, but from the strangeness of being spoken to directly, of having her name said correctly, of being argued for by someone with the power to do so, after 11 months of being invisible. He nodded once, the way men did when they received something without needing to perform a response, and turned back toward the camp. She watched him go, and tried to ignore the warmth she felt, some small, traitorous thing, in her chest. She didn't trust it. She had trusted warmth before. She had trusted a lord's goodwill and her father's pack, and the basic fairness of a system that had, in the end, stripped her family of everything on the technicality of her absent wolf. Warmth from a powerful man was not safety. It was a feeling, and feelings were not evidence. She turned back to her tent to collect Emmerich for breakfast. But she had gone 3 steps when she heard it, a sound so faint that she almost convinced herself she had imagined it. A low, resonant hum from somewhere deep inside her own chest, behind her ribs, in the place that had been hollow her entire adult life. She stopped walking. It was gone as quickly as it came, brief and sourceless, like a door opening in a room she hadn't known existed. She stood completely still in the morning fog for a long moment, her hand pressed flat against her sternum, her heart beating steady and fast beneath her palm. Then she breathed out and walked on. The hearing at Greyvale took place in the great council chamber of the border fortress, a cold, high-ceilinged room with stone walls and iron torch brackets and a long table of dark oak that had clearly witnessed many difficult conversations. Lucy stood at one end of it in a borrowed dress of deep blue wool, her golden braid pinned at the back of her neck, her hands folded in front of her with the stillness she had spent years cultivating. Across the table sat 4 territorial lords, 2 royal advisors, and King Cassian. He sat at the center, not at the head, a positioning she recognized as deliberate. A king who sat at the head of a table owned the conversation. A king who sat at the center of it owned the room. She had spent the 4 days of travel preparing for this. The woman assigned to assist her, a capable, gray-eyed lady named Hester, who asked few questions and anticipated many needs, had helped her locate a copy of the Greyvale Compact in the fortress library. Lucy had read it twice through, annotated it in her memory, and identified 3 additional clauses that supported her claim beyond Article 9. She was ready. She presented the petition clearly and without ornamentation. The Varden bloodline, the land absorption, the covenant clause, the timeline. She cited the record room entry at Harwick's castle as documentary evidence. She did not explain how she had accessed it, and no one asked, because the entry's existence was the relevant fact, and not her method of finding it. She presented Roland's overheard conversation, and the subsequent wolf pursuit, as evidence of deliberate interference with a legal petitioner's right of access to the crown. When she finished, one of the advisors, a thin man named Lord Price who smelled of dried herbs and old ink, leaned forward. "The claim is technically valid," he said, in the tone of a man who found technical validity inconvenient. "However, the covenant clause specifies a confirmed heir. Confirmation requires proof of bloodline and, in the case of a wolf-blooded line, evidence of the shifter inheritance." He looked at her with careful neutrality. "Lady Varden has, by her own account, not shifted." Silence settled over the table. Lucy had anticipated this. She had anticipated it, and she had no answer for it, because it was true. She had no wolf. She had never shifted. The hollow place behind her ribs had been hollow for 23 years, and one strange hum in a morning fog did not change the fundamental fact of her inheritance. She kept her face composed and waited. "That is a matter of some complexity," the king said. Everyone looked at him. He had been largely quiet during her presentation, listening, watching, asking too precise questions at moments she hadn't expected. Now he leaned forward slightly, his pale blue eyes moving from Lord Price to Lucy, with an expression she had learned over 4 days to read as deliberate. "A wolf-blooded heir who has not yet shifted is not the same as a non-wolf heir," he said. "The Greyvale Compact does not specify a shifted heir. It specifies a wolf-blooded one." He looked at Price. "Do you have documentation that the Varden bloodline is not wolf-blooded?" Price blinked. "No, but then the bloodline claim stands until disproven." He sat back. "The land will be held in continued provisional trust, and Lady Varden will be granted a period of 1 year from today to provide confirmation of her shifter inheritance. During that period, her petition remains legally active and no secondary claim may be filed by any other party." He looked around the table. "Are there objections?" There were 2, both from lords with territorial interests in the southeastern corridor. The king heard them with patience, and dismantled them with the calm efficiency of someone who had been arguing law since before those lords had their current titles. When he was finished, the objections were still technically present, but had nowhere left to stand. The ruling was recorded. Lucy walked out of the council chamber into the cold corridor and stood with her back against the stone wall and breathed. Emmerich found her there 20 minutes later, his face carrying the particular expression of a boy who had been listening at doors. He protected the claim, Emmerich said. He found a legal path, she said. That's different. Lucy. Her brother looked at her with their father's gray eyes and their father's particular gift for directness. He did it because it was right, and because of you. She didn't answer that. She found the king that evening in the fortress library, alone, which surprised her, a candle burning at the reading table and a map of the Eastern Territories spread open before him. He looked up when she entered and did not look surprised, which told her he had heard her footsteps in the corridor. I wanted to thank you, she said, properly. You thanked me this morning, he said. That was relief. This is deliberate. She crossed to the table and stopped across from him, the map between them. You found an argument I hadn't thought of. You found 3 that I had, he said. I counted. She looked at him. In the candlelight, the scar along his jaw was more visible, and his blue eyes were darker, the pale quality of them absorbed by the low light into something warmer. He looked in this room, with this light, like a man rather than a king, or perhaps like a man who had simply been both for so long that the distinction had stopped mattering. May I ask you something? She said. Yes. Why does it matter to you? My claim, my lands. She paused. You could have let Price kill it at the bloodline point. It would have been simpler. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the map. Then he looked up at her. Because your father was right, he said, about the Greyvale Compact, about what the clause was meant to protect. He paused. I wrote that clause, Lady Varden, in the 3rd year of my reign, after the border absorptions, because I knew that families like yours would be displaced, and that the system would not correct itself without a mechanism to force it. His jaw tightened slightly. I did not anticipate that my own beta would use his position to prevent it from being invoked. The silence in the library was complete. She thought about Roland, about the flat administrative tone, the quiet certainty, about the fact that the man meant to serve the king had been quietly dismantling the king's own protections for reasons she still didn't fully understand. The inquiry, she said. What will it find? That Roland accepted payment from Lord Fenwick to suppress your petition, Cassian said. We found the correspondence this morning in Roland's saddlebag. Fenwick has territorial interests in the southeastern corridor and preferred the Varden lands remain in provisional limbo. He paused. They will not remain in limbo. And Roland. He will be stripped of his beta rank and tried before the council. His voice was even. Justice requires a proceeding. The proceeding will find what the evidence shows. She nodded slowly. Then, because she was her father's daughter, and her father had believed in naming things clearly. The sound, she said. 4 mornings ago in the camp. In my chest. She pressed her fingers briefly to her sternum, the gesture she had made in the fog without meaning to. It happened again last night, and this morning. Cassian went very still. Describe it, he said carefully. A hum. Low. Like something waking up. She looked at him steadily, like a door opening. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said quietly, That is your wolf. She had known. She had known, and not permitted herself to know. The way she had not permitted herself to feel relief until it was safe to feel it. Why now? She said. Because wolves recognize safety, he said. And mates. The word fell into the room like a stone into still water, and the ripples from it moved through her before she could stop them. Not with the sharp pain she would have expected, not with the recoil that the word mate had carried since she first understood what it meant and watched other people's bonds be used as instruments of control. Instead, It moved through her with a quiet, resonant truth that her body recognized before her mind fully caught up. She thought about what she knew of him. 4 days, a legal argument, a voice that cut through noise by quality, a man who had written a law to protect people like her and then spent 4 days making sure it was honored, a man who had spoken her name correctly in front of his beta without being asked. She thought about the warmth she had refused to trust. "I don't know you," she said. "No," he agreed. "I need to know you." "Yes," he said. "That's the correct order of things." She looked at him across the map of her father's territories. Her territories now, protected by law and by time, and by a clause written by the man standing across from her. The candle between them burned steady in the still air. "Then we'll start there," she said. 3 months later, the formal restoration of the Varden lands was recorded in the Royal Archive. Lucy stood in the council chamber as Lucienne Varden, confirmed heir, wolf-blooded and shifted at last. Her first shift having come on a cold night in Greyvale, with Emmerich laughing from the doorway and Hester pretending not to cry. The wolf she carried was pale silver, almost white, and moved with a quietness that several of the king's guards later described, privately, as unsettling in the best possible way. Lord Fenwick was tried before the full council and stripped of his Northern Marches title. His lands were redistributed among 3 families, whose claims had been similarly suppressed during the border absorptions. He left the capital in the gray of an early morning, and no one of consequence watched him go. Beta Roland was convicted of bribery and interference with royal legal process. He lost his rank, his seal, and his place in the Ashen Pack's hierarchy, and was remanded to a border garrison posting where his particular gift for administration could be directed toward supply inventories rather than political maneuvering. It was, Lucy thought, a very precise form of justice, not destruction, but reduction. He would spend the rest of his career being exactly as small as he actually was. Emmerich was given a proper page's position in the royal household, one that came with tutors and a stipend, and the kind of future their father had wanted for him. He was insufferably pleased about it, and pretended not to be, which was so completely their father's mannerism that it made Lucy's chest ache with something that was not quite grief anymore. More like inheritance. She and Cassian learned each other slowly. The way things built to last are always built. Not quickly, not without difficulty, but with attention and honesty, and the particular intimacy of 2 people who had both, in different ways, learned not to trust easily, and then chosen to try anyway. He was direct, and sometimes blunt, and occasionally infuriating in his certainty, and she told him so, and he listened, which was the more important part. She was guarded and occasionally cold, and needed to think out loud before she reached conclusions, and he gave her room to do it, which was the more important part of that. The mate bond completed itself not in a dramatic moment, but in a quiet one. An evening in the fortress library, a map between them, a conversation about the Eastern Territories that turned into a different conversation entirely, and the simple, final recognition that the warmth she had refused to trust had been trustworthy all along. She became his Luna in the first month of the new year, in a ceremony that was smaller than protocol demanded and exactly the size it needed to be. Emmerich stood at her side. Hester wept openly and was unapologetic about it. The silver wolf sigil of House Varden was formally joined to the black wolf of House Vael in the royal record, and the clerk who recorded it noted in the margin that it was the first Covenant Clause restoration in the history of the Greyvale Compact. On the night after the ceremony, when the hall had quieted and the candles had burned low, and the fortress had settled into the deep stillness of a winter night, Lucy stood at the window of their chamber and looked out at the snow-covered courtyard below. She was thinking about her father, about the maps he had loved, the texts he had read aloud to her, the small folded cloth lesson about the power of being underestimated, about the land that was hers again, the name that was hers again, the wolf that had always been there and simply needed to recognize home. Cassian came to stand beside her. He didn't speak. He had learned by then which silences she needed to keep and which ones she was ready to break. After a moment, she reached across and took his hand. "He would have liked you," she said. "My father." "Tell me about him," Cassian said. So she did. Outside, snow fell quiet and steady over the eastern territories, over the Thornwood and the King's Road, and the borderlands that bore her name. And in the royal record, in careful ink, the Varden line continued, no longer provisional, no longer suppressed, no longer gone. Present, restored, permanent, exactly as it should have always been.